And lots going on in Liverpool as well.
Yeah, it's great. I think we forget that it's like a massive tourist place.
Yeah.
Like I always think it's always busy there, but people obviously come and see the docks, the whole, the music tours, football. Like when you live so close to it, I think you forget
you take it for granted. Yeah,
how big of a tourist attraction it actually is coming up here, I think. And then a lot of people now do like Liverpool, Manchester, and because of the Wrexham documentary.
Oh, what's that?
So Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney bought Wrexham Football Club, and then now they've got this documentary.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So a lot of Americans and Canadians come over.
Right.
So they do Liverpool, Manchester, and then they'll go and see Wrexham Football Club, like as a bit of a triangle of places.
Yeah, no, I didn't know that at all. I'm not a big football fan, as you might
it's all right.
might have guessed.
Okay. I'm just trying, yeah.
I wish I kind of got into it and liked it, but I just
I think it is one of them, isn't it? You either like it or you don't, or you're not interested. Welcome. So Holly Donohue, this is the part where I rip off your LinkedIn, and we'll see if you actually agree with what you've written about yourself. So apparently, in your own words, you help companies do things a little differently to drive commercial success. Perhaps you don't need a full-time chief product officer, but could really do with the experience of one. You might need help establishing a new product function into the business, or maybe you already have a product and engineering function and want to get it working better than ever before. That's where you come in to help fix challenges and work out market fit, define a clear product strategy and roadmap, build new product and software teams with advice with an org design and process, upskilling, coaching, resolving delivery problems. You've got over a decade of experience in leading change in product and tech teams and nearly 20 years in tech. Tackling these problems is what you love to do, and you take a hands-on approach where you need it, and you can be a trusted advisor where you simply need guidance. Did you write that?
I did write that. I wrote that when I very first started out in my consultancy business.
Yeah.
So before I'd got any clients. But yeah, that's actually probably still a fair reflection. So well done, past Holly, for predicting that.
It's all right. So I picked out one of your LinkedIn posts that sort of resonated with me and I thought might be interesting. I've trimmed it down slightly because this is about you, not my droning voice. But if I read some of it and then we'll see what triggered that post. So I think this was maybe last week, the week before. Failure has been my greatest teacher in setting up my own business as a consultant. I had to figure out how to set up and run a company, build processes and assets from nothing, find ways to generate opportunities, relearn how to manage your time, learn how to sell from scratch, find a service/market fit. We talk often about failing fast, but in reality, it's so easy to build up a fear of failure. Let's normalize talking about embracing failure and turning it into growth. What if failure was a positive thing? What triggered that post?
I think in terms of just reflecting on my own learning, but also reflecting on, in a lot of organisations, we do talk about failing fast a lot in Agile. And in product management, it's a really key principle in terms of you want to validate and test things early on and often, and failure is okay. But I think very often that kind of gets lost, and it's a reflection on how quickly that kind of fear of failure does creep in. And actually, we rarely create those spaces that are safe for us to fail. So I think a lot of what I like to try to do is perhaps sometimes model that vulnerability, or model that piece where, it's a common experience, it's a shared experience, it's okay, and it's around actually that's not a bad thing. I really enjoyed reading a book called Mindset by Carol Dweck, which is all around growth mindset. And that was also something that really inspired that post, which was around embracing growth mindset and what that actually means, and how having a growth mindset is around being open to those failures and just seeing those as a learning and seeing those as an opportunity for, well, what can I do better next time?
Yeah.
And that's something I've really had to embrace in setting up my own business, because there are some things that I've had to do from scratch. I've not done sales before. I've, touched upon marketing. We're doing products, but I've not actually really had to do marketing myself before. And I've definitely, in both of those things, I've definitely mistakes that I've made and things that I could have done better. But they're the things that I've really learned from, and, I've started to drive my success by learning from those, and just not rather. I kind of very much went into it with a mindset of, I'm a beginner at this, so I'm going to make mistakes and that's okay, rather than going into a mindset of, I'm an expert and therefore I'm going to beat myself up every time something goes wrong. I just went, oh, okay, that didn't work, move on. And it's been really freeing to do that, and really, really kind of enlightening, and that made me reflect on how we just don't really do that in organisations so often.
Yeah.
I don't, when you're in a permanent position, you don't feel like, especially if you're an exec, you don't feel like you've got that scope to fail or that opportunity to fail. A lot of the time it's constantly about, proving your value, I guess, and demonstrating your value.
Yeah. We'll get into the whole product management. What is it? What isn't it? Loads of time for that. But what was the sort of, you've obviously got loads of experience, loads of years under your belt. What was the sort of journey into freelancing and why? Like, not like start with why and what's your purpose and all that, but like why? Yeah.
So in terms of moving to freelancing, so I guess it probably helps to talk through a bit about what I've been doing in my career running up to that, which is really what led up to that. So, I've been working in tech, like you said, for about 20 years. I've had various roles amongst that time. So I actually started out in operations, project management, a bit more on the actual delivery side rather than on the thinking about what we should be doing or the strategy side. And an opportunity came up for me to move into product management. So I took that opportunity. But when I first started doing it, that role was very much defined as a bit of an SME, so a bit of a subject matter expert. And actually what I realised very quickly was I was not a subject matter expert on that product. So I didn't know what it was that we needed to build. We were very much in a waterfall place, so I didn't know what those requirements should be. So very quickly realised, well, I need to start talking to customers to figure this out.
Yeah.
And so that's when I started to come across organisations like Mind the Products were very big at the time in terms of that thought leadership and the books that are available. So that's how I started expanding my knowledge. But around that time, we then brought in some consultants who were Agile consultants, and we did, the classic waterfall to Agile transformation. It was actually a really successful transformation, so I had a very positive experience of that. I ended up leading a lot of that transformation within one of our offices, within our Manchester-based office, which was a little bit like the blind leading the blind at the time, because I was very new to Agile and product management still. We were all trying to just figure out how to do that. But that was probably the first inspiration in terms of, this consultancy thing seems quite interesting, and this might be something that I want to do in the future. But it was probably about 10 years of doing some of that transformation work as well, working with different organisations. So I worked with Co-op Digital, where they set up the digital team as a startup within Co-op. Okay. And when I was there, a lot of what we were doing was, because they were quite separate almost from the business units that they went into. So a lot of people will know Co-op because of the food and the little food stores, the convenience stores. But obviously Co-op also have a lot of brands in terms of funeral care, legal services, insurance. They did power at the time with B2B power. So each of those were effectively different businesses within the Co-op operating. And it was around merging the digital team back into those business units. So keeping the good practices, but getting them to collaborate and work more smoothly with the business units. So it was a different kind of experience of transformation that came with a whole set of new challenges. And again, when I then moved to Purple, it was another transformation effectively. It was another looking at our working practices. How can we mature our product team? So I've kind of had these repeated experiences of doing it. And as I grew my network of product people, I met a lot of consultants doing it already and doing similar things. And it got to a point where I really wanted to do it. I made the decision to leave my previous role and decided that that was the time to to make a go of it.
Make the jump.
Probably in the worst possible market to start off with.
How long ago was it? Sorry.
So this was at the start of this year. So yeah, pretty bad market. But at the same time, I figured if I can make it work now, then I can make it work anytime.
I think that's admirable. I respect that. If you can make it, if you can do it now, which you obviously are doing well, when it all settles down a bit, you'll be flying.
Yeah, it'll be easy, easy peasy by that point.
This time next year, probably.
Yeah.
What does a day as a fractional CPO look like?
Yeah, so the way that I manage my time is I really try and time block days as much as I possibly can for clients to try and minimize that context switching. I think one of the biggest challenges of fractional work is you are working with multiple clients in different contexts. At the moment, the people that I'm working in are completely different ends of the spectrum in terms of their maturity, in terms of the markets that they're serving. One's public sector, one's private sector. So that context switching can be challenging. So I'm really conscious around managing that. So I guess starting off my day, I like to set up my day in a way of spending some time for myself. So I make sure that I try and exercise most days. I meditate most days. I have to look after myself so that I can perform my best. Mm-hmm. I'm not one of those people that gets up at 5 a.m. though. I'm not a morning person.
4:30.
So yeah, not a 4:30 crew. You don't have to do that to be successful. So for me, it's 7 a.m. I don't have kids to look after, so I don't have to think about other people at that point. I can be quite selfish and look after myself. And so then before I start with one client, I'll just have a quick check-in of my email. I've got 4 email inboxes to manage at the moment. I keep them separate because otherwise that context switching would just be chaos. So I have 4 separate email inboxes and obviously my LinkedIn messages as well and Slack. So I've got a lot of different places to manage for messages. So keeping on top of that is quite challenging at times. So I time box that. I try not to be constantly doing that throughout my day and distracting myself. I time block my time. So the night before, every day, I write down what are the most important things for me to be working on that day. What meetings do I have in? What time slots am I going to work on those items? Because that means that I'm using my time effectively, because otherwise there's that thinking time of what do I need to do now? And you've lost 15 minutes trying to figure out what you're going to do now. So very, very conscious and intentional about how I spend my time. And then from 9 o'clock, I'll be working with a client. So for example, I might be having a coaching session with a product manager on the team, for example, or a product leader on the team. I might be running a workshop. So at the moment, I'm just setting up a go-to-market workshop because that's something the client's not really done before. So I'm helping put a framework around that. But a lot of what I try and do, because I'm only working with clients potentially for a day a week to 3 days a week, I'm not there the whole time. I can't do all the work. So I'll be looking at ways I can set people up and then they can go away and also own that work and they can actually move, do actions to move things through. Yeah. So I'm looking at what can I set up to help people get along. And then lunchtime, I'll be checking my emails. I do like to make sure I take a break for lunch. Again, I think it's really important to take that time for yourself so that you can be effective. And in the afternoon, I might be looking at getting up to speed a bit more on the product, figuring out where I can add more value. Might be having meetings and meeting other people. It's all around figuring out what's the most impactful thing that I can do. And quite often I'll, have a check-in with the person who's hired me. I work from a backlog. So what I do with my clients is we have a shared backlog where they can suggest things that they think that they need. I can suggest things that I think that they need. And we figure out what's the biggest priority. How can I have the most impact? So we're constantly refining that backlog. It's like a Kanban board, effectively. Like so that we're constantly working on the thing that's most important for the business, which particularly one of the businesses I'm working with at the moment is a scale up, the Series B, very, very fast paced. So what's important one week might not be as important the next week. So it's making sure that we've got that flexibility to flex to what they need at that time.
And in terms of context switching, do you double up on like one client in the afternoon, one in the morning, or do you say Monday and Tuesday is A, Thursday and Friday is B, and then C is whatever else?
Yeah, generally I try and avoid doing that because it helps me just be in the zone, albeit I have to keep on top of my messages as well. But occasionally I will do, so occasionally I might do half a day. So with very small startups, I do some mentoring with them.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of people who I do mentoring with, a couple who are kind of clients as well. So I might take half a day for the ones that are clients where I just focus on them because they need me for, say, a day a month, and it's more of an advisory capacity, but I don't, it's kind of half a day every 2 weeks that I'll work with them. So in those cases, that's when I need to maybe have half a day on one client, half a day on another client. But typically I try to avoid doing that.
I like it. I think you touched on it already, really. So I'll dig a bit deeper. You mentioned a backlog of work with clients. And don't forget, I come from an environment of Agile coaches who sometimes accountability is not always there. Like, I'm the Agile coach. I'm not accountable for anything. Or it depends. It's the favorite one. But and I suppose in your role, it's even more important, and especially now being a freelancer. But how do product managers, product people, chief product officers, how can they evidence their work? Like, how do you keep your receipts, if you like?
Yeah, I think there's a textbook answer, and then there's probably a bit more of a real world pragmatic answer to this one. I think the textbook answer, and something that we should always be striving towards, is ultimately the role of the product manager is to ensure that we're working on the most valuable thing. So if you're working in a commercial organisation, most likely that's going to be increasing the revenue of the business. Sometimes it might also be retention, especially so in the market currently, a lot of businesses have switched focus from winning new business and new customers to retaining existing customers and expansion of existing customers, so upselling to existing customers. So as a product manager or as a product leader, it's really important that you understand the focus of that business and how their success is measured. If you're that product leader position, it's particularly important to understand, how is the business invested and how are the investors measuring that success? How are they measuring the success of the business? And therefore, what can you and your teams be doing to help move that goal forward? So if it is, for example, more of an expansion goal, then how can you make sure that the product has those expansion upsell opportunities and the sales team are equipped to be able to actually sell those with the right information that they need, and the marketing team are equipped with the right information to market the product. So then you're measuring on those financial measures, but of course often they're lagging measures. So, sometimes, especially if you're in B2B, the sales process can be really long. You might not have such a high volume of customers. You might have a smaller number of high value customers. And so in those cases, it's quite difficult to directly attribute, we added these features to the product, or we made these changes to the product, and therefore we've had this impact on our revenue goal.
Yeah.
So you need to dig a little bit deeper to understand, well, what are the leading indicators into that? So how do we understand that the change that we've made has had a positive impact on some end user behavior that's then actually contributed towards that ultimate revenue goal? So it might be tracking the engagement of the customer with the product, monthly active users, daily active users, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It might be understanding actually how they're engaging with the product. What interactions are they actually doing? What's the funnel that they're working through in the product? What's their time to value? So how long, for a new customer, how long does it take for them to actually recognize or get some benefit from using your product? That can be a really powerful, impactful thing to measure. So it's thinking about those metrics in terms of what actual value are we delivering in the change that they're doing, and every time we make a change, how are we going to measure that success, and thinking about that before you even start the work. I think that's kind of quite aspirational for a lot of companies, I find, in terms of how they're currently working. A lot of companies are not really anywhere near measuring that value. So it's important to just start measuring something, but also at the same time, your success as a product person might not be measured by that value yet.
Yeah.
So it's understanding what your stakeholders think is the value that you're delivering as a product person, and you need to make sure that you're delivering against that. Quite often that's going to be delivery. So quite often that's going to be, are the teams delivering against often dates in a low maturity environment? And we want to move away from that because, there's all sorts of reasons why that's not necessarily the most helpful metric. A big part is you can deliver 20 things in a time period, but if none of them actually have a impact on the customer, then what's the point? So, but if that's what your stakeholders care about, in order to build up that relationship of trust, in order to make sure that you've got that position to start to influence change towards thinking about value, you need to also deliver against what they're expecting from you. Because if you're not doing that, then you're going to really struggle to influence any change or, move the company forward.
And how does that work when you go into somewhere? Like, how do you start to build that trust? Because sometimes it can be, oh, bloody hell, here's another consultant. They're on a day rate. Why should we listen to them? We've been here years, blah, blah, blah. How do you specifically, talking from your experience, go about that?
Yeah, it's very dependent on the individuals involved and, the person who's brought you in. There's the bit of the due diligence that you do as well to make sure that working relationship's going to work. You're going to be able to make that impact. So I think there's the qualifying work that you do as a consultant to make sure that, it's not just that just like when you're looking for a permanent job as well, it's not just that the company are sussing out, are you the right person for the role? You're also sussing out, is this the right opportunity for me?
Yeah.
Is this somewhere I can make an impact? So, if you've done that due diligence, then in terms of your main contact, at the very least, at least you know that you're going to be able to have establish that collaborative working practice with them and that kind of co-creation of value with them. And then going into the organisation, it's a case of meeting the individuals and just understanding where they're at. And, there'll be some individuals that will be really keen to engage because they see you as an opportunity for change in the direction that they want to head in. And there might be individuals that find it a bit threatening you coming in. So it's understanding what's driving that fear response for them. So is it because they're worried that you're going to almost show them up and show that what they're doing isn't right or is bad? Is it that they're worried about the changes that might come in? It might push them out of their comfort zone. It might push them out of, everybody wants to feel like they're a master of what they do.
Yeah.
So it might be pushing them outside of that feeling of mastery. So it's figuring out for that individual, what is it where are they at with you and how are they responding to you when you're introducing that change, and then how, what's driving that, and then how can you address that? But I think a lot of it is really working very transparently with people, very collaboratively with people, and showing them that they've got that opportunity to shape the direction. It's because there's no point me coming in and just saying, here's a load of frameworks, here's a load of templates, use these.
Yeah.
That's not going to work. It's, okay, well, what do we need to do? Well, how can we pull together a template together that maybe works on here's some examples I have. What are your thoughts on that? You know the context of the business better than I do because I don't know your context. I know product management. I don't know your context. So let's bring those things together.
I like what you said there about people don't like being pushed out of mastery.
No.
They like to own their domain, don't they? I like that.
Everybody wants to feel good at their job. Everybody wants to feel like they're good at what they do. There's very few people you're going to come across who don't want to feel good at what they do. So as soon as you introduce something that they feel like a beginner again, for, some people are very comfortable with that and have a very high comfort for that kind of position. But, understandably, there are many people that find that uncomfortable because you kind of, I'm not really sure how I progress. Will people be thinking that I'm not very good at this? We all want to be good at what we do.
And they want to know what's in it for them, don't they?
And what's in it for them. And why are we making this change? It's not just, that's the other important bit. Why are we making this change? It's not just for the sake of making it. It's constantly iterating the why behind everything that we do. And, that's important when you're a manager in an organisation. I think it's even more important as a consultant because you've not got that same role power or position and power to influence the change.
I'm sure you may do something similar, but I always, if they bring me in personally, I'll say the communication of why I'm being brought in needs to be crystal clear.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to walk in uninvited to a session or a workshop and they have no idea who I am or why I'm there.
Yeah.
So the communication of why you're bringing someone external in, I think, is very important.
Yeah, and I think it's important it comes from within the organisation as well, because, you can absolutely articulate that yourself, but when you're first coming in, you've not got that relationship of trust yet. You've not had time to establish that yet. And obviously people will be worrying about what this means for me, what this means for my position. And, the organisation, the managers within it need to make sure that they're managing those expectations.
Yeah. You mentioned tools, templates. One thing that does the rounds from time to time is product maturity models, product questionnaires. Are there any good product maturity models or assessments out there, in your opinion?
Yeah, there definitely are. I think, we love our tools in Agile and in products. We absolutely love our templates and tools, and they can be really helpful. I think in terms of maturity assessments, there's a couple that I find really useful. The one for product managers is Petra Wilkes. She's got a model which she introduced in her book, Strong Product People. It's a really great book for product leaders. She's a really great product coach. And that's a really helpful one for assessing where product managers are up to in terms of their skill set and awareness. It's very easy to use, very straightforward. So I think that's a great tool. And then...
is it like can you break it down as to...
Yeah, it's kind of like it's a self-assessment. You can do it with your manager as well now. It assesses you in different product competencies and where you're up to. And I mean, that will start to surface if you're doing discovery or not, for example, because it'll, if none of your product managers are comfortable with discovery practices, and that highlights that there's a gap there. So I think that model is really helpful in terms of assessing product managers and capabilities there and understanding where people are up to. And then I think the John Cutler model, so he has this model called mandate levels. And I find that really interesting because it's a way of assessing the maturity of an organisation in terms of where the product decisions are being made. And at the very kind of bottom level, it's got the comment that people are basically told what to work on and they just code that, build that. And then the idea is not so much that, when you do, when you're assigning outcomes to teams and they have the freedom to decide that, it doesn't mean to say that work isn't still happening at the bottom somewhere. Somebody's still doing that. It's just the question of who's doing that. So if it's the case that the managers or the exec team are making all of the decisions and then they're just handing off requirements to the team, that suggests that it's quite a low maturity model. But if the product managers are getting involved a bit further up that scale, so they're getting involved at a strategy level, or they're getting involved in maybe shaping some of the epics, for example, then that suggests that the organisation's a bit more mature. If you're actually getting designers and engineers involved further up that chain, then that suggests another level of maturity. So all of those decision points are being made somewhere. The question is, how far down the chain is that being delegated? Is that being delegated to the people closest to the work, closest to the detail, or is that still held at the top level of the organisation?
I like that. And what's your opinion on product management, product ownership?
Oh, that's a really common topic. So it's funny because I've seen a lot recently. I think Marty Kagan not that recently now, but he went on a couple of podcasts talking about product ownership and product management, and product owners aren't necessarily adding value to organisations. They just basically become backlog owners. They're just writing tickets. And I think that if you look at the origins of it, product owner is a term that's come from Agile. It's a role on the team, but that doesn't mean to say it has to be done by one person. It's just a set of tasks or things that have to be done. And, if you look at that Agile definition, Agile kind of starts in delivery. It doesn't really go into the things that happen before delivery. So it talks about the product owner prioritising the backlog, but there's no mention as to where that that backlog comes from, how you get to that backlog, how you figure out what the priorities are in the first place. It doesn't really go into that in that much detail. So that's that. If you've just got that pure product owner role, then it can be a little bit problematic in terms of that product owner not really having the context that they need to be able to effectively make those prioritization decisions and understand the why we're doing this and understand the benefits that we're trying to deliver. The product manager role tends to be, sometimes it's billed as more of a senior role, but it's used so interchangeably between different organizations. And I guess, the good thing is that they tend to have a lot more, ideally there's somebody who's actually speaking to customers. Ideally they're externally facing. They're having those conversations. They're leaning into the research. They're looking at the analytics. They're thinking about long term as well as the short term and the immediate term of the team. Now, I think the challenge is it's really quite a big role to do both of those things together.
Yeah.
But when you separate them out, it can be, that also causes problems as well. So you need to make sure that the team size is appropriate for the product manager to be able to handle both that strategic long-term piece, but also have a handle on what the team are actually delivering and that they're working towards value and we're still prioritizing the right things on a team basis as well.
Yeah.
And it's quite a tricky role, but I think, that's so much to do with that team structure, the supporting roles that you've got around it. If you've got really great UXers, if you've got really great researchers, and they can take a lot of that load off the product manager. You still want the product manager to have some contact with customers because I just think it's so important to be able to empathize with them. But it's quite tricky to get that whole piece working well. And I think that's where the makeup of the team is really important.
What's the best makeup of a team you've ever come across?
So definitely it's very context specific, I'd say. I think in the most mature organisations, so one of the organisations I'm working with at the moment is actually quite mature in their, quite product-led, mature in their ways of working. And they've actually got a product manager to 3 engineers, so not many engineers at all. Each team has effectively got a UXer, they've got a marketing person. So the marketing person is integrated within the team, which is really interesting. And they've also got a subject matter expert who's integrated into the team as well, and a QA person as well. So that is a really nice makeup for a very mature team. And then they've got researchers who float effectively and can help advise the teams as and when's needed, help run research initiatives as is needed. Same with data science as well.
Yeah.
So that works really well as a mature team. They're doing very high levels of discovery. They're working to OKRs. The teams have a lot of autonomy in terms of what actually needs to be built. So in that context, it makes sense. If you've got a very low maturity SaaS company, for example, then I still think in order to really make progress, really having one product manager per team, you really do need that per engineering team. And again, you don't want that squad to really be any bigger than, say, 10 people, because it just gets, in terms of the lines of communication, it gets too big and the team can't communicate effectively. Yeah. You still want somebody who's doing QA, whether it's to be honest, QA, ideally you do want somebody who's trained in that, who's looking at that, because it is a really valuable skill set in its own right.
Yeah.
Ideally, you want somebody assuming that you've got a front-end element to your product, UX design. It might be that in that low maturity environment between the product and the UX person, they're managing the user research aspects, they're managing the analytics aspects. I think definitely you want to have those skill sets embedded in the team, because when you think about that piece we're just talking around in terms of the product manager having to look at that long-term strategy, potentially serving things that the board needs, and also that really short-term piece in terms of what the team actually need, what user stories they need. So really, that's a lot to be doing. And if you're doing that for multiple initiatives, multiple products, it's not really feasible to be doing all of that with just one person.
Oh, thank you. Got to pull on the OKR thread slightly, because they're very much flavour of the month at the moment. What are your thoughts on the implementation of objectives and key results within organisations?
Yeah, I think they can be done well. They can be really, really effective. And if you really are empowering the teams to figure out how they're going to deliver to those OKRs, that can be really effective. So again, the organisation I'm working with at the moment, they have a set of company OKRs, and then each team and department figure out how are they going to fulfil their OKRs. Leadership team makes sure that we're still reporting on them. We're kind of bringing that piece together to make sure we're actually delivering against them. They assign an owner to make sure each metric, each key result is being monitored and moved towards the right way.
So just for clarity, because people will be wondering, all of those teams' OKRs, they link up to the main one.
So there is only a main one, interestingly.
Okay.
So they have, say, 2 or 3 OKRs with obviously a few key metrics underneath them. And then all of the departments and teams even non-development teams are working towards those.
Right, so they don't separate them out.
So they don't separate them out, which is interesting.
Okay.
And what I like about that is it keeps it really simple.
Yeah.
Because what can sometimes happen is you end up with almost too many layers of OKRs and it just becomes really unmanageable.
Like a massive, messy family tree.
Messy tree, which starts to lose meaning. So actually that keeps it really neat, really clear. Everybody knows what they're working towards. Everybody's pulling in the same direction. I've seen it done where companies have gone down to individual OKRs and that just doesn't work. So you've kind of got company, you've got team, you've got individual. It just... I don't think OKRs work very well for individuals because there's certain roles where it's really difficult to define a key metric in a way that makes sense. So if you're a designer, how do you measure a designer's effectiveness? You end up coming into those output metrics. How many designs have they delivered? Is it good that they've delivered more designs, or actually is that actually a bad thing? Same with developers. Is it good that they've delivered millions of lines of code, or is that actually meaning that they're maybe doing something in an inefficient way? So when you start to go down to the individual level, it loses meaning and becomes more about the output. So I think it's important to keep it to at least a team level. Try and keep it simple. Try not to have too many layers, because I guess the other anti-pattern you get with these OKRs is you can end up spending so much time setting the OKRs for the period. By the time you've agreed what they are, you're halfway through the OKR period. And I've seen that happen as well. So you need to have a really good process for setting them, which means that you've agreed them within the time period that you need and everybody's clear about what they are and can start work on them. And you need that process of checking in on them, so it's not just a set and forget and you've come to the end of the period and you realise, we've not actually achieved any of these because we've not incorporated them into our working practices.
Thank you. I think that'll help a lot of people out. I saw you talk at Agile Manchester back in May, I believe, and I've seen Agile on the Beach. I think you've been to a few or spoken at a few meetups. You seem to be quite heavily involved in the product scene. Was that a coincidence? Was that intentional because you've been freelancing? Like, how did you get more involved in the whole public speaking side of things?
Yeah, it's something that I've been doing for quite a few years. I've been doing it more now that I've moved into freelancing because it's a great tool for marketing effectively, and also for investing in my skills and making the time to actually continuously invest in my own personal development as well. So how I started out, obviously I'd done things within my company before. So I'd done talks within the company, I'd done talks to customers, but my first external talk was actually at Product Tank Manchester. And it was a lightning talk. So it was 8 minutes long. It was terrifying. Halfway through, I think I felt, I'm teaching my grandmother to suck eggs here. Like I'm telling people, talking to a room full of product managers about product management, surely they'll know all this already. So that was that was kind of a terrifying experience. But then afterwards, I got lots of really good feedback and people being like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. Oh, that's really helpful. So I think that was my very first experience of it. And then I've carried on since. So I then did a longer talk at Product Tank Manchester, and then I spoke at an unconference. And then I was working with a coach, or she was a coach at our organisation, and she encouraged me to, with her, go to Agile Scotland and do a case study of what we'd been doing at the company that we were working at
When
the
did
time.
you do that? What year?
That was 2018, I think.
Okay. Doesn't matter then.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have crossed paths.
A while ago. Pre-COVID, pre all of that stuff.
Yeah, I did a talk with another lad. 2022. So I thought,
Yeah, no, it was a while ago. And so I think that's kind of what got me into it. And then I've done quite a few now. Spoke at Mind the Product in Hamburg a few years ago, for example. And
international speaker. You put that on your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah, put that on it. I think it gets easier the more you do it, for sure. The first few times were really nerve-wracking. The first few times, it's always the first time in front of a bigger audience, the first time when you're on a stage with the letters. I always wanted to be on stage with the big letters, and now I've done that a few times. But at first, that's really terrifying. But I think the more you do it, the more comfortable you become at doing it, and the less nerve-wracking it is. The more you become comfortable that, if you forget what you're saying, it doesn't matter, because the audience don't know what you've planned to say. So you get better at kind of carrying on if you get a bit stuck, and you don't get stuck as much because you're less nervous. I think it's just a case of practice, a case of I've spent quite a lot of time understanding and learning and researching how to do good talks, how to structure a story, how to do good slides, investing in that effort. Cringely watching back presentations and videos of me talking so that I can see, every time I'm rocking on my feet or I'm pulling my top down, and, working on that on the next talk and getting feedback from other people as well is really helpful. So I think it's a case of kind of constantly working on that. It's, I used to say that I love to hate doing presentations, because I really enjoy doing all the preparation and thinking about what story I'm going to tell and thinking about how I'm going to tell that story. Although sometimes it's stressful, because, you go through all those curves of how am I going to construct this, and then it all comes together, and then you go on stage and it's that scary moment, and then you come off stage and actually it's really lovely, and you hopefully get lots of good feedback and realise that you've helped people. Yeah,
thank you. I think what you're doing is great. I think there's a few product people who are doing some good stuff. We've had Evie on here as well. I think people will be, looking up to you both and saying, "Wow, how do I do that? Like, how do I make that jump into freelancing?" What have you learned since going out on your own, and what would you advise others to think about?
Yeah, Evie's great, by the way. She's somebody I know as well. I think I guess first off is getting a reasonable amount of experience doing product management so that you feel like you've got a good base to go from. I think that is important, so that you're going to have the confidence that you've dealt with different scenarios. You've seen how it's done in different organisations, so that you know what you're getting yourself into. So I think it definitely helps to have, a few years experience behind you. I think from then it's figuring out, firstly, why do you want to do it? Why is it important to you? Because you're going to need that motivation, because it's, there are parts of it is tough. It's a lot to take on. So you're setting up your own business, and that's not known to be a lightweight thing to do. Making sure that you're really clear on why you're doing it and why it's important to you. So for me, for example, I really wanted the opportunity to see how different organisations work, spread, increase the impact that I can have and help different people. I see it as a really big learning opportunity, and that's something that really motivates me. So it's understanding what that is for you. And then speak to a lot of people who are already doing it. So that's how I started, was find people who are doing what you want to do, speak to them, find out how did they do it. I think a lot of people will tell you, it's all network driven, and it is very heavily network driven, but that's not necessarily very helpful when you're just starting out in terms of how you actually leverage that network, how you build up that network. So it's really thinking about, what does that marketing piece look like for you? Because you're now a marketer, you're now a salesperson, you're now a finance person, as well as being a product person or an agile person, and also being aware that how you are a product person within an organization is different from what that looks like as a consultant, because as a consultant, you also need to be thinking about, how can I have the biggest impact as quickly as possible in as shortest time as possible, and deliver what the client needs. So it's figuring out all of those pieces. So for the marketing piece, it's thinking about, what does that look like for you, and there's no point doing a type of marketing that you really hate doing. So if you really hate posting on LinkedIn, don't use LinkedIn as your main marketing channel. If you really hate doing conference talks, don't use doing conference talks as your main marketing channel. Think about, what is it that works for you? And there's, lots of options, whether it is doing a newsletter, or it's speaking at conferences, or it's reaching out to everybody in your network and seeing if they know anybody. It's taking lots of people out to coffees. It's attending events. Figure out what is sustainable for you. And I think really that's the piece to focus on. And then it's a case of, then when you get into the sales processes, it's then figuring out, well, what does a sales process look like for me? So it's just taking it step by step.
I think that sustainability point is great. I think it's, if you can't, one thing I try and think about is, if I can't see myself doing it in a year, it might change in the year and things happen. But if I can't see myself doing this process in a year, a bit like a diet, not a diet. We don't use diets. You get cancelled for saying diets, but healthy lifestyle.
Yeah.
If you can't see yourself doing it in a year, it's probably not sustainable. And I think it's the same with that marketing approach.
Exactly. I kept reading everywhere that you need to have a newsletter, because you need to have ownership over your mailing list. You need to kind of speak directly to people. And, I had every great intention to write that newsletter, but it's taken me 3-4 months and I've still not written that first newsletter. So that's probably telling me that writing newsletters is just not the one for me. So, and that's okay. You've just got to find what works for you.
Yeah. I like that. I've flirted with newsletters over the years, but
it's a big commitment. It's a really big commitment.
I could force one, but it won't be very good.
Yeah.
So I think that, it's got to work for you, hasn't it? On that same note, marketing, what's the company called? Where can people find it? Where can people reach out if you're happy to? Plug away. This is your opportunity to tell people where they can get in touch.
Yeah, great. So my company's Product Rebel. The best place to find me is probably on LinkedIn. So I'm Holly Donohue on LinkedIn. I'm very active on there. So feel free to connect, drop me a message. I'm happy to have a chat with people. I don't necessarily need to have a commitment, but always happy to talk to people and build out my network as well.
Yeah, great. Is there a question throughout this chat that I should have asked you that I haven't, which you would have liked me to ask?
Oh, that's really interesting. Oh, you've put me on the spot there in terms of thinking that. You know what? It's thinking about, I think it's actually what are some of the common patterns that I see in organisations, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want me to answer that?
Go on then. Yeah.
Go on. Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. I think one of the things that I really wanted to get out of consultancy was learning those patterns and seeing what happens. And, from early stage startups, what I'm seeing a lot is that people they often stay in their comfort zone and they end up getting stuck and not progressing the company because they're doing the tasks and things that they're finding really comfortable, and then they're not leaning into the piece that they need to lean into. Yeah. So often that might be marketing, it might be cold outreach for them, it might be following up and, moving leads through that sales pipeline. Often people will get very, very focused on the products and building the product out, but they're not speaking to their users or the customers, and as a result, they don't get that product market fit because they don't have a deep enough understanding of what the end users actually need. So that's definitely a pattern that I see in terms of early stage businesses not getting that product market fit, a lot of the time it's because they're avoiding an activity that maybe they don't feel as comfortable doing and isn't within their zone of what they enjoy doing, or they're spending so much time speaking to investors that they're missing on that marketing piece, for example. And then in scale-ups, the thing that I'm often seeing now is that companies they'll find a product that works really well. They'll have a lot of initial success, which gets them to being that scale-up, but then they'll get a bit stuck. They'll kind of hit a ceiling and they'll start releasing new products or new features, and they'll find that they just don't get the traction on them. They're not, they're spending millions of pounds on development, and actually they end up with no customers or no users on that new product or on that new feature. And I think, it's that recognition that what got you to here isn't what's going to get you to there. And I think that's where investing, I'm biased, but investing in product, and in product management, I really believe can help with that, in terms of starting to do that validation work early on, starting to figure out, is this the idea that's going to, is it solving a genuine problem? Is it something that's actually viable? Is it going to give a return on investment for customers? Is it something they actually need and are going to adopt? And doing that due diligence work is so important. And the thing that it's not going to, you can never guarantee success, but it's going to reduce the risk of you investing a lot of time on something that perhaps either isn't going to work at all or needs some tweaking for it to get that right fit.
What a place to end. Thank you, Holly.
Thank you. It's been great.
Thanks for coming on.